Hey everybody, Terry White here, and it's the day you've been waiting for, the Adobe MAX releases for Lightroom. So I'm going to be showing you 4 of my favorite new features in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. I'll bounce back and forth. I think just about everything I'm showing except for one major change to Lightroom is in both Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. So if I show it in one, you can most likely do it in the other, all except for one thing in Lightroom, and that's local storage. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So let's dive in and let's start with a new feature that deals with color correction called point color. Let me show you how it works. So point color is the ability to go in and address specific colors in your image by literally pointing at them or selecting them. So for example, we've had all non-destructive edits, of course, and we've had the color mixer for a while. And the color mixer, as you can see, this particular image, the fireman's standing next to a red fire truck, and some of that red glow is onto my fireman's face. So, especially in the hair and other areas. Now, if I were to go in and even adjust the hue or the saturation of that red, well, as you might guess, I'm adjusting the red everywhere. So yeah, I'm taking it out of the fireman, but I'm also taking it out of the fire truck. So that's not going to work. Now, I could go into the brand new point color, which is great. It gives me a selector, lets me go in and select the specific tint that I'm looking for. It identifies it and lets me adjust it. But even that is slightly adjusting that same color in the fire truck. Well, luckily, this particular feature also works with masking. So if I were to go into the mask, and I were to let it detect people, which it should find a person because we have a person in this shot. We'll give it a few we'll give the AI a few seconds to figure out where the people are. And let's let that happen. All right, it's identified the one person in the shot, and there he is. Great mask, by the way. That's pretty cool. We're missing part of the uniform there, but that's okay. We don't need that. Let's go ahead and select. And that will, of course, give me all the various options to create the mask for this person. So here's what I want. I want the facial skin, because that's where it's reflecting. I want the eyebrows, because it could be reflecting in the eyebrows as well. I want the lips, because it could be reflecting on his lips. And I definitely want the facial hair and the hair. So I'm going to create one mask. I could create separate masks for each one of those, but and you might want to do it. If you really want to do really fine detail work, you might want to create a separate mask for each one and then go address the red in each one because it could be a little different for each one. So you could do that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and create one mask just for the sake of demonstration for all of those areas. And that will create that one mask, and we can call that one mask fireman. All right, so now that I got the fireman mask, now when I go back and go to point color and click, I can click anywhere in this mask. So for example, back to the face, and you'll notice that when I make my adjustments, it's only happening to the mask area. So it's doing a little bit on the hair, but it's really doing it on the face, and more importantly, not affecting the fire truck, not affecting anything else. And by the way, I could have also done body skin to get his hand as well. But you get the idea. You mask whatever you need. Now, I can still go back and grab a new selector and go in and deal with the hair. So if I thought the hair was still a little too much, I can pull it back in the hair as well. And that way I get a beautiful before and after just using point color without having to affect the fire truck. So this is gonna be great for doing these type of color corrections and adjustments and fixing and changing and enhancing color directly in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic and even on mobile. So you'll have the ability to do this on mobile as well. All right, so now let's move on. I got some exciting news for people that work in Lightroom and work with HDR. What is HDR? HDR stands for High Dynamic Range, and it's a typical tonal range where you get the detail in the shadows all the way through the highlights by usually combining multiple exposures together, merging to HDR. That's where it comes from. So the problem is, up until now, you've been able to create HDR in Lightroom. You've been able to kind of look at them and edit them, but you've been looking at them and editing them in SDR, Standard Dynamic Range. That all changes today. Let's take a look. So I've got an image that I merged together as an HDR. This is one of my Iceland images back couple trips ago. And I now have an HDR button because right now we're looking at this in standard dynamic range, SDR. So the sky looks kind of washed out, the mountains look washed out, but the detail is really there. That's why I merged in HDR to begin with. But if I click on the new HDR button, this will let me edit and display in high dynamic range to see the increased depth and realism with brighter highlights, deeper shadows, and improved tonal separation. And not only can I edit in HDR, I can output the image in HDR as well. So we're looking at this on an SDR screen, or, well, I'm looking at it on my HDR screen. You're looking at it maybe on an SDR screen because the video is SDR. But I've done the next best thing. I've recorded my screen so that you can see the dramatic difference. So let me turn it back off, look at the screen now, and let me turn it on. And look at the difference in the mountain range. Now you'll also notice, and this is big, the histogram. When it's off, we see the standard dynamic range histogram, and it's showing a lot of detail in those highlights, but we really can't see it, and it looks like the highlights are just blown out. But when we turn on HDR, we actually get 4 more stops of brightness past what we would typically see, which is the brightest spot in the display. So I see all this detail in the HDR range that's there. All the red, green, and blue is there, all that detail in the image, and I can even see it visually because I'm looking at this on my MacBook Pro, which has an HDR display. Now, if I wanted to really visualize where that data is, there's a Visualize HDR button that shows me where the data is in the photo. So I see the same blues, purples, light blues, so forth and so on in this HDR range to show me that data. Even down here in the water, I can see it a little bit. So when I turn the visualization off, it goes away. I can turn it back on anytime I want to see where that data is. And more importantly, in my tone curve, I can now make adjustments to that HDR because it also has an HDR section over to the right of the tone curve to be able to really edit in HDR and see the results on my HDR display. Now this is great. I was able to capture and merge in HDR. I was able to edit in HDR, but how do I get this out? How do I get this to show people that have an HDR display as well? Well, now when you export out, if I go to my custom settings, I have the ability to export out as a JPEG, and as quiet as it's kept, that also has HDR information. But I have 2 new formats, JPEG XL and AVIF, which contain HDR info. So if I switch to any one of those as an output method, I will have the ability to get HDR output in either one of those methods. So you can enjoy and have some fun, not only importing HDR, editing HDR, but exporting HDR, high dynamic range, for a full workflow in Lightroom starting today. This is so big, I'm just gonna not even try and explain it. Let's dive in and take a look. So I'm in Lightroom, and I'm in Lightroom with all my photos and videos backed up and synced to the cloud, available on all my devices. I'm in my favorite part of Lightroom, which is the organization. All my folders, my albums, my drone footage, everything that I've shot that I hold near and dear to my heart. That's why I sync it to Lightroom and have it backed up. However, we've heard loud and clear that you want something else. You want a choice. So you'll notice now for the first time in Lightroom, at the top, there's 2 tabs. There's Cloud, which is the way Lightroom has worked for years that you know and love. You can add photos and videos, sync them, back them up, edit them, export them, all of that. That hasn't changed. But you now have a new tab called Local. When I click on Local, this is your local storage. This is your system. This is essentially a file browser into your system. So you'll notice that I have my NAS connected, my server, my T-White volume. I've got all my drives connected. They're all here. I see my operating system's desktop, which has got a couple images on it and a bunch of folders. And I have a shoot that I copied over to my desktop for my New York City photos and videos. And when I click on it, I instantly see them. I see all my photos and videos right here on my local storage. So I did not have to add these into Lightroom. I just pointed Lightroom to this folder and it sees them. So I can even start doing metadata changes. So for example, if I like this one, I can make it a 5-star, I can make it a pick, I can make it a reject. I can do all the things I would normally do in Lightroom. I can double click on it and see it large. I can play it back, scrub through it. It's a video. This all works locally and this is great. Now, when I go back, I can scroll through and I can see my raw files. And more importantly, I can click on an image and I can double click on an image and instantly render it and see it and also be able to edit it. That's right. So I can do all the things I normally do, such as choose a profile, such as camera vivid. I can hit auto tone. I can grab my crop tool because it looks a little crooked to me. Maybe about right there. Great. I can continue editing and maybe brighten it up a little bit more. I can bring out the shadow detail on the right a little bit more. I can even go into my presets and use the adaptive presets such as Blue Drama for the sky, one of my favorites. I can pull that back a little bit for this particular photo, and I can do all the non-destructive editing that I've always done in Lightroom. The best part is when I've done all my edits, if I like it, I can just go ahead and simply share it out, never having to add it to the Lightroom cloud. It works the same way if it had been in Lightroom Cloud, including all the metadata changes I've made are now stored locally. So I can always come back to this photo. But let's say out of your 500 photos and videos that you did your shoot with, there are maybe 10 or 15 you did edit and you really like, they're your favorites. Well, at any given time, you can copy a photo or video or several photos and videos, if you select them all, and copy them to the cloud. So now this one is being synced and backed up. If I make further changes to it locally, I'll have an option that says update the edits to the cloud. So I have a cloud copy that has any edits I've done thus far. I have the local copy that's still on my drive that I can do anything else I want to do with. And speaking of your drive, you can do organization here as well. So for example, if I go back to this folder and I want to use the little menu here and I can say, create a folder inside my photos and videos, my New York photos and videos. So how about NYC faves? And if I create that folder inside the New York folder, there it is. And you may be thinking, well, is it really there? Well, let's go ahead and show it in the operating system. And there it is. It's in that same area. And of course, it's empty right now. So if I open it up, there's nothing in it. But if I go back to my regular photos and videos, the ones I've been working with, and I say, hey, this one that I just worked on is a favorite, I can drag it and move it into that folder because I'm doing local file management. So if I go back to it now, I see it in there. And if I say show it in the Finder, there it is. And if I twirl it down, there's the image, including its metadata changes, all there. So you have the choice of working locally without ever having to sync things to the cloud, or you can sync certain ones to the cloud, therefore freeing up space in the cloud for the ones that you say, hey, I'm never even going to use these. Why store them and back them up to Adobe's cloud? I can store them and back them up locally. You can also work offline. So if you don't have an internet connection and you want to just immediately plug your card in, copy the photos and videos to your drive, and just start editing, now it's that much easier. You don't ever have to wait for it to sync. It's all local. And if you choose to have things sync, you can. It's truly the best of both worlds. You decide what's in the cloud. You decide what stays local. You decide if you want them in both places. And you decide which edits you want sync to the cloud and which ones you don't. And this is a big one. This is kind of an early access one. So let me explain what this is. So, and by the way, the masking had already started working, identifying the people. That's great. But anyway, let's jump back to the regular edits and let's go into a new early access edit. And this is, or edit capability. Early access means this is kind of in beta. It's not finished yet, but you'll be able to access this in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. And we can go ahead and click on lens blur. That's exactly what this is. So when I click apply, it takes a few seconds to calculate it because the AI is figuring out, same thing as doing a select subject. of what the important parts of the photo are so that you can blur the background. So when we think about blurry backgrounds, we think about shallow depth of field and shooting with a wide open aperture. And we do that in our camera, when we did it in our camera, but maybe you didn't do it enough. Maybe you didn't have the right lens. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe you want to adjust it after the fact. And now you can. You even get to change the shape and appearance of the bokeh. So you can just click on each one of these and try them out once you do your blur. So now the blur background, let's go ahead and apply it. Let's pump it up a little bit. And we're blurring out that background. You might think, well, is it really doing it? Well, that's before and that's after. So look at the windows in the building. It's actually doing it. And so I isolated my subjects. And you might say, well, how do I know what it isolated? Where there's a visualized depth. So when I click the visualized depth, the things that are in the different colors show me what it identified as what it should be keeping in focus and what is not in focus. And you get to even control the range so you can make it more precise. You can move it around. You can choose what parts of the photo. So in this case, I'm saying make the buildings, because remember the buildings were in that purple color. I'm saying make the buildings more in focus and my subjects out of focus. So again, it's just like moving the focal point with this focal range slider that you would do in your lens before your camera, before you take the picture. So this is going to be amazingly helpful for creating these shallow depth of field effects and increasing even a photo that may have already had a little bit of it and you want it more. You'll now be able to do that by simply controlling the amount of blur that you want. So kudos to the Lightroom team for giving us these capabilities. And again, experiment with I'm not really going to see a big difference in the bokeh, the different bokeh shapes here. Where you would really see that is on images with a lot of little fine details or lights, for example. That's where we usually see it. Like the background has like Christmas tree lights or lights, little pendant lights. You'll be able to really control the shape of that bokeh effect on those lights by just clicking the various icons here. All right, those are my 4 favorite things of what's new in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. I didn't get a chance to show it to you on my phone, but most of the same things I'm showing you, including the new editing experience, just to kind of reorganize things on the phone as well. So go ahead and check out Lightroom on your phones. And yeah, enjoy. This is going to be a blast now working with Lightroom and doing even more than we ever could before. And again, all non-destructively, all on Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Mobile, Lightroom Web. You choose the surface you want to work on and do these cool things. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.